I think that you are above me, well, then I'm going to need you to see me as useful or like, oh, some sort of thing where I can then glom onto you. And then if I think you're below me, I'm going to put you in a box that I wouldn't necessarily ignore you, but it's like our interactions are going to be like super, like surface level.
Case. So the concept of this story is basically my dad would travel around and I would ride with him. And every so often he'd see something interesting and we pull over and he talked to somebody and they had like a cool story or a cool an expertise, a something that they were just overflowing in, right? And an area. Now some people like he'd go talk and he's like, not interested, and he'd walk away and I'm like, whew, okay, but he wasn't very discreet about it. But so often like we'd visit with these people and it didn't matter what they looked like or where we were. We could be in the middle of nowhere and talk to these um I remember in Thailand we stopped at a like it looked like a metal junk shop and this guy was doing something and my dad was like, what are you doing? And he was like rebuilding a part to a motor that here in the States, the mechanics would just like, we can't do that.
Yeah, that's impossible.
That's impossible. His van got flooded to the roof and they and when you go through a flood, like silt gets into
Oh
everything.
yeah, yeah,
They took all the silt out of the car, out of the van. They took it all out of the television. He had a big television set. They took it apart, cleaned it up, put it all back together. Like the things that people are capable of is just amazing.
yes.
And you were talking about how you've been sober for
20 years.
20 years. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And we talk a lot about like, so I spent through probably a couple years, well, the bulk of my adult life just working on personal growth, right? Me, my peers, like this is kind of what we always talk about is this whole personal growth, because if it isn't for our personal growth, we wouldn't have the choices that we have today to put in the toilet that we want to have the housekeeper, to have the toll
Right.
tag, to just do the things that we're able to do because we would have that limiting mindset.
Yeah, and a lot of it too is I was on autopilot for decades. And the weird thing is there, you don't even know, well, you don't know what you don't know. And so a lot of it becomes this thing where I thought I was making, well-informed decisions, or I thought I was doing things by choice. And I look back and it's like, damn, I was sleepwalking through a bunch of stuff.
Can you give me some examples where you're like, "Oh, I'm doing this on purpose," but in fact you were actually sleepwalking?
Oh yeah. So anybody that, I would always say like anybody that f's their life up bad enough that getting sober is the answer. It's like, you have gone way off the map as far as wise decisions or good choices or whatever. But in the moment, even back then, like, okay, so let's say it's 1987 and we go to Grapevine Lake every weekend and just get hammered drunk and party and everything that goes with that. And at the time, it's like, oh, I like to party. My friends like to party, and it's the 80s and it's hair metal and it's everything's crazy. And now, don't get me wrong, I'm certainly glad that all of that happened and I have a bunch of killer memories. But there is that, like, wow, I wonder what would happen if I hadn't have done that. And well, we'll never know. But the idea of getting hammered drunk every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, like,
Mhm.
oh, that's just what we do, never really thinking about it. And then if you have we would call it the genetic predisposition for addiction and or alcoholism or whatever, over time that seeps into, oh, now it's, happy hours Tuesday night as well. And then it's Wednesday night. And then the next thing you know, it's a big part of what your life centers around. And I don't know anybody that ever did that intentionally. It was literally just what happened over time. And then you don't know until the horse is out of the barn, or like my case, I was 20 years old when I got a DUI. So it was like I wasn't even old enough to drink yet. And I'm already, driving drunk and getting arrested or whatever. And so,
Right.
but like that wasn't even a blip on the radar as far as getting me to slow down. And like there in the moment you're sleepwalking and you don't even know it. You just attribute it to like, oh, those asshole cops or what, or whatever. Just a bunch of things that you would never attribute to yourself. And there's this weird equation that the freedom that comes with accountability is counterintuitive, and the idea of like, oh, I'm here because of what I did, not because of all these other things where I was put upon or I was forced into, like I was put upon by life or I was put in circumstances where I was forced under duress to make bad decisions. That then, and then if you do have the extra added wild card of like an addiction or something like that, there's a point where that thing is your friend and your sidekick and your coping mechanism, and then at some point it turns on you like a snake, and it is so unpredictable that now you're kind of living a life but not really. It's this weird thing that, and it's so slow and insidious that you don't really realize that it's happening. And for me, it wasn't until I started to get in trouble and I would paint myself into a corner. And then there was this pattern of get in trouble, get sober, get out of trouble, then do it again. And you just have this lather, rinse, repeat cycle that when you're in it, like the fish doesn't know he's swimming. And so
Mm.
it's, you don't necessarily know that what you're doing is a direct result of your actions. So it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy where like, oh, all this bad stuff always happens, and so you just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And it wasn't until 2004 when I got sober and I had painted myself into a corner with work. At the time I was operations manager at Brooke May's uh, music, and it was
I
great
remember
because,
Brooke Mays.
oh yeah, and it was great because I worked at the Mesquite store, and my office was in the back in the warehouse, and we just did metric tons of band instruments and stuff. But as a result, because I was not around, I was alone all day, so I could go to work wasted, I could go to lunch and drink, I could come back, and it was also part of the lifestyle or whatever. Um,
It was
but
your peer group. Your peer group did that.
yes, yes, and that's why I said like at the beginning, it's like, oh, me and my friends, we like to party, or I hang out with the partiers, or that, and
Mhm.
then that slowly takes over, and it isn't until hindsight when you realize, oh man, I was doing that for a long time before I even recognized, or the thought even crossed my mind that I didn't have to do it, you
Mm.
know, and so uh, I know lots of folks that have bad habits and things where they want to change something, but it's not glaringly catastrophic or tragic enough to actually go through the pain of being different or doing something different. And then like for me, there was also like, well, if I'm not the party guy or whatever, then who am I? Because
Right.
I got sober at 36. So in my mid 30s, it's like, whoa, I wake up and it's like, holy hell, I'm in this like bombed out crater or whatever. And but it was of my own making. And then it just becomes this kind of training wheels thing where you kind of acclimate yourself back to real life, so to speak.
Mm.
And the only thing I got out of that was just one foot in front of the other, or, early on, the thing that I took away from it was one day at a time, and then the compound interest that comes with that over, say, 20 years is remarkable. But you'll never understand it. There's no context, and it's impossible to even imagine when you're on day one or day 15 or day 53 or whatever. Uh, and so there was a long time where I was just going through the motions, you know, and now I would like to think that I'm at least slightly more well informed and intentional about what I do. And you can also tell by the caliber of your peer, like what you said, your peer group,
Mhm.
as you ratchet up in your value to others, not your, because like a lot of things that, or a lot of times folks are tripped up by worthiness, like, oh, I'm not worthy of X, Y, or Z. And
Right.
there's a difference between your value and your worthiness. It's
Mhm.
like you can be valuable and still think that you're just a total fraud, a total imposter,
You're
etc.
not enough, yeah.
Yeah. And that, like, the value is external. That's placed on you externally. The worthiness is internal, and that usually comes from some sort of it's learned behavior for sure, and it comes from
Absolutely.
some sort of pre-programmed or early on program. Because every time I have either somebody that works for me, because it's like I have two ex-wives and no kids, so it's like I don't have anybody that I actually raised, but all of the guys that work for me are, at least chronologically in the place where they would be my kids. And so a lot of what I do there is I'm giving them permission in like the macro to do something that they're afraid to do. And it's, again, it's a learned behavior. And so often when I ask, like, okay, well, whenever you're being hypercritical of yourself or you skew negative right out of the gate, whose voice is that? Because it's like you didn't come to that conclusion on your own. That's
Right.
somebody else talking to you, from the mists of time and history. And a lot of times it's like, oh, my mom was this way, or my dad, or my older brother, or the kids, and
Right.
so it's so crazy that the whole sleepwalking thing where you don't know what you don't know.
Mhm.
And
Well, you know what you said that was so beautiful that really struck is the freedom of accountability. Like you just kind of threw that in the sentence like it was nothing. And I was like, I'm like, that right there, because the way dive into, like, explain how those those words, how those sit with you and what those mean for you and how that's played out. Because I think that right there, I believe is just huge.
uh, it is huge in hindsight. It is one of those things where it is counterintuitive to any sort of, oh, I know, if you it's almost impossible to project out, like, oh, if I start showing up in this way and telling the truth about it. Because one of the things that's like addiction 101 or alcoholism 101 is you become an exceptional liar and or cheat and or just deceiver more than any.
Believing the false.
Yeah, and a lot of it too is just out of self-preservation. Like,
Yeah.
have you been drinking? No. And it starts as simple as that. And then, well, that was easy. And if you avoided any kind of consequence by doing that, okay, well, that
Okay.
sort of reinforces that as a skill set or a coping mechanism. And so you end up in this vicious cycle where all of a sudden your locus of control is just somewhere else, and everything that goes wrong in your life is because of someone else. And you know myself included, I've known a lot of people that they became like super adept at this massive lattice work of why their life was shitty. And it was like all of these other things were like, if X then Y then dot 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 happily ever after.
They
And
gave away
one,
all their
there's
power. They just gave away all their
yes,
power. Yeah.
yes. And we live in this world now today where uh the perception management is so huge for everybody, where
Ooh,
where
perception
okay,
management.
and then depending on going back to the worthiness hierarchy that
Mhm.
most of us have, like, kind of,
That we
it's like a lot of,
self-inflict?
yes, for me it was like this kind of framework of worthiness where if I walked into somewhere I would immediately assess whether you were above me or below me.
Mm,
And then based on that equation, that of course has no real basis in fact, but
right,
based on that equation, I'm going to need you to see me in a certain way that I completely made up. It's totally arbitrary, but that's where perception management comes in. So, like, if I think that you are above me, well, then I'm going to need you to see me as useful, or like, oh, some sort of thing where I can then glom onto you. And then if I think you're below me, I'm going to put you in a box that I wouldn't necessarily ignore you, but it's like our interactions are going to be like super, like surface level. There's not
right.
going to be, and all of that again, it would be this crazy um, calculus that I would do in the moment. But there again, all of that comes with the whatever you would call it, that predisposition for addictive behavior. And
I think But I think that judgment happens with everyone. Like everything that you're saying, it's not just addiction. It's not just like
yes,
this is maybe addiction. Like you're talking about your alcoholism, but this addiction behavior is a
oh yeah,
natural
addictive
behavior.
behavior, yes.
Is it's a behavior that I think everybody finds themselves entrapped in.
Yes, and I probably I would associate it more with on my side, the world that I came from pre sobriety, only because it was being in recovery and sobriety that actually allowed me to look at it and realize like, oh, that's what you were doing. And so like there, yes, I probably attribute a lot of things to alcoholism and addiction that are universal. It's just that without the umbrella of recovery and like all of the mentors and sponsors and all of that stuff in that world, I would have never looked at it, and I would have never had the external validation and confirmation of like, oh no, did we all do that, to varying degrees. And
Right.
again, having that thing where it comes from some, like one of my business coach, mentor, therapist, whatever you like. She wears like 73 different hats, but and then like there, a lot of that is um, going back to the accountability thing. That was learned behavior. It was learned behavior to blame everybody, and then it was learned behavior to take accountability. Like what's funny is in today's world, if the shortest distance between 2 points in a business situation that goes sideways is, oh, I totally effed that up. Sorry, that's on me. And 99 people out of 100 don't know what to do with that. They're expecting a story. They're expecting some sort of smoke screen, some bullshit like, oh, my this, that, or the other thing didn't do this, that, or the other thing, dot, dot, dot. That's why this happened. Uh, and so the just that sort of taking ownership of things like that, it's so disarming to people
It's
that
refreshing. I think it's actually
that too.
refreshing. It's
Yes,
refreshing. It's refreshing to others. I think it's refreshing to yourself. Uh,
yes,
I I I could not agree more. When somebody doesn't take accountability, then like where do we go? Because you have to start somewhere, and if you start at a false location, you can't wind up at the correct destination without doing a lot of weaving. But
yeah,
if you start at the exact correct location, then the route to the finish line can be very direct.
yes,
And
and
I love that you bring that up. It's that, and I love the freedom of accountability. Like that right there. Like you mentioned that at the very beginning, and then the stories that you share, the things that you're saying, it all goes back to that right there.
yes, and like one of the things that uh, I have gotten much more comfortable with is taking the L on something and acknowledge. Like for example, my first commercial lease before the studio that I'm in now, I totally got my ass kicked. Now they were terrible property managers, and the accounting is still screwed up to this very day, even though I'm long gone. It was just like one of those things where I didn't know what I didn't know, and now
Mhm.
I do. So I can look back and go like, wow, that sucked. And, that was tens of thousands of dollars just, into the abyss. And, but then on the flip side of that, I'm like, okay, well, that's the worst thing that ever happens to me. Then, okay, wow, we're doing pretty good. But
Right.
the idea of I signed the papers and, I did everything I could, but I didn't know what I didn't know. And I made some decisions in the moment that seemed like the right ones, or that were depending on folks that were, well, not necessarily dependable in the long run, or only dependable or reliable to a certain degree.
Right.
Like say anything past,
They could get you from 1 to 3, but they can't get you from 3 to 7.
yes, exactly. And so learned all that. And then it was essentially like this because I mean, it weighed on me like every day for probably 18 months,
Oh,
and
that's an energy
yeah,
suck.
Oh my God, yes. And it was one of those things too where like it wasn't necessarily like on my mind all the time, but really like maybe every third or fourth
But
day.
it kept coming up.
Yes, and it comes up and punches you in the face whenever something else is already effing with you, and because that's the way my mind would work. It would never be like, oh, we have this you know, alphabetical list of things that are currently situations or problems or
Mhm.
whatever. And we're going to triage these and it's all going to make sense. And we're going to, we're going to address the ones that need addressing. No, it was always just like, shock and awe. Just,
Well, that's how, if we think about how our brain works, right? It's like there, like it is the purpose of being in stillness and in quiet is to have those random moments of thoughts and ideas and things like that to come in random. And the value of having your house taken care of is is that we can have new thoughts and ideas that don't
yeah,
just come and slap you in the face. You're like, that again.
right, right. And then going back to the accountability thing, uh, like the way I would couch it is to win fair and square. Uh,
Tell me
I,
more.
I know what it's like. Again, I did well on standardized tests as a
Hmm.
child. So I was in gifted and talented and like all this other stuff. Uh, and that with my, predilection for intoxicants and other things, that leads you to be um, an amoral agent of chaos is kind of how I would put that.
Wait, what does that mean? You
So
said some words that I don't know what that meant.
um, it happens in a lot of folks that have um, the alcoholism addiction thing, where I would always couch it as, oh man, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm getting the key to the city and I'm the employee of the month and I'm this, that, and the other thing. And then by 7:30 at night, I'm like 7 drinks in, we're getting high. All of a sudden, I don't care about anything or anybody. And I'll steal your weed and help you look for it. And I'll just do like, uh,
I
a bunch.
got it. I'll
Yeah.
sell you weed and help you look for it. I'm like,
Yeah.
the others is like something I think is, but it's that's the immoral part. I
Yeah.
got you.
Yeah. Where,
Well, I'm not saying that the other is unhealthy, right? But
yes.
that's unhealthy. That might be some little self-sabotage. But the
But
second
the
part,
other is a net minus to the tribe, you know,
yeah, okay.
and
I
and,
get
and
it.
there's something. So
Ooh, a net minus to the tribe. I've never heard that. That's so I get that. Okay.
so like what I tell the guys that I sponsor now, like say somebody comes in and everything's on fire, total chaos, about to lose the job, the wife, the house, the kids, or whatever, and they're like, oh, I feel like a piece of shit or whatever, and it's like, yeah, you should. I mean, look at your state of affairs. Like if you
Look
came
what
in
you
with
got
all of
yourself
this,
into. Like
yes,
you got
it's like
yourself into this. Now get
yes,
your
and it's
now
like
you can get yourself out one step
yes,
at a
it's like
time.
if
Got it.
you've done all of this and this is the sum total of your best efforts, you rightfully so should feel like a total piece of shit because everything you've done has completely collapsed or combusted, like just self immolated. And then the idea is um, there is a spiritual aspect to like a 12-step program or
Yeah.
all of that. But the thing for me is, um, I find that difficult to teach and difficult to transmit. And the idea of, do these things, dot, 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 you'll find God or the universe, whatever. So,
The higher power, right?
yeah, so I shy away from that just as a function of, what might work for the next three guys that walk in, you might think is just woo woo, jibber jabber, whatever. So it's like I shy away from that. However, my overarching philosophy is, um, you know, if you are okay with like Darwinian evolution and the fact that we have evolved from tribal animals, we are just um, hairless apes that have, gotten bigger and bigger. And the idea was it like Dunbar's number or whatever. You can only know like really well like maybe 100 people max. You know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
have so there's that, and then if you've lived your life in a way that you ended up about to lose everything and having to get sober, in the Darwinian sense, you brought nothing of value to the tribe for
Mm.
however many years. And so you are a net minus to the tribe. And that impacts your, you want to call it your soul, your spirit, your, even if you just wanted to break it down to like the science of that impacts your Darwinian prerogative and drive to, imprint your genes and have another generation take over. You have done nothing to do that. So the idea from just even the evolutionary standpoint of you were a net minus to the tribe, dot, dot, dot. So you feel terrible because
Mm.
you're supposed to. Because even from the sense of the tribe, if you are not contributing, you can take it back to like, okay, well, if you don't contribute and you are terrible on the hunt, or you don't hunt, or you don't gather well, or whatever, or you're just a crazy person,
You're
you're
not a
not.
contributing member of society.
Yes.
And
And
that's funny because that's what I tell my children. It's like, I don't care what you do. You just got to be a contributing member to
yes,
society. That's
you
a
have,
net positive.
yes, you have to be a net positive of the tribe, and that will feed that little. So like as the guys, kind of start unscrewing their lives, and that thing sort of builds up, it becomes. I always liken it to, if you are a net minus to the tribe, you're not invited to sit by the fire. And unless you know how to go kill the woolly mammoth, make your own fire, and do all this stuff by yourself, which you do not, uh, in the evolutionary sense, you'll die. So being a net minus has a shelf life, and it also does not have a happy conclusion. There's
What do you
no
mean a shelf life? What does that mean?
meaning that you can only do that for so long until you are so isolated and on an island. That's why a lot of people go so far into depression. In my opinion, they go so far into depression, or they get drunk and they kill themselves, because it's like
Mm.
I've known several guys and gals that have done that. And you know there again, it's, if a left turn here, a right turn there, I don't know, but there are certain things that are kind of universals. And I never thought having mentees, or having, guys under me that I've watched, literally start from scratch, and now can do pretty much everything I can do. Just the only thing they wouldn't have is necessarily the context that would come out of more years of experience, you know. And there's also that sort of uh, social stigma where, okay, 63-year-old agent from fill in the blank doesn't want a 26-year-old driving her entire brand, whereas, excuse me, just by virtue of being around longer,
Yeah.
gets more credence in the conversation, you know. Um, but otherwise, having that sort of chartable growth in the folks that come under me is way cooler, and that's kind of what I mean by like the winning fair and square, where it was like I was, and the whole thing going back to the accountability. I spent so much money this year on forensic accounting and CPAs and all this other stuff that I am not naturally wired to want to do. I'm naturally wired to want to get away with stuff. And I don't even mean like intentionally doing something that is knowingly wrong. Because I could actually sit here and say, like, oh, I know the exact last time that a lie came out of my mouth that I knew I wasn't telling the truth and that I lied to a person. And
Mm.
that was during the ice apocalypse in whatever it was, 2020 or 2021. I got rear ended on Beltline. And
Should we
uh,
share this?
what's that?
Keep going.
Yeah.
I'm scared what's coming
Oh, no,
next.
no, 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 no. I got rear ended on Beltline Road in the ice. And then whenever I turned it into the insurance company, I have a dent in my front quarter panel. And when I took it to Service King for them to grease pencil and go around, he put that front quarter panel on the list of damage. And then when the adjuster called me like 3 days later, because I whenever they called and I said like, oh yeah, this and this, and then okay, we'll get the report and we'll circle back. And I thought like, wow, I just told him that everything was tagged on the report or whatever, da, 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 knowing that the front quarter panel was not part of the equation. Uh, and then he calls 3 days later and he's like, yeah, look, going over the photos and kind of looking at the quarter panel in the front, it looks like that's an older scratch. I'm having a bit of difficulty reconciling that with the damage to the tail light and the rear end. And I just played dumbass where I'm like, you know what? I think you're right. I think that probably didn't happen that day. And so like there, I didn't necessarily do a full confessional to the guy, but
Right.
but I pulled the plug on trying to get one over on the insurance. Not that they don't deserve it, because that would have been very easy to justify.
Well, by
But
the grace of God, we don't always get what we deserve, right?
yes, I have a sponsor that says everything's about grace and mercy.
Hmm.
Grace is getting things that you don't deserve, and mercy is not getting what you do deserve. Basically a
Yeah.
punishment wise. Uh, and I'm like, okay, I'm hip to that. But yeah, so the whole accountability thing is a game changer in it gives you agency
Yeah.
where you end up feeling like, oh wow, at least to a certain degree, I am the captain of my own ship. And you know, I always have these long existential or metaphysical debates on whether it's because I say evidence breeds confidence, where it's like, oh, you can feel like an imposter and you can totally suck, and rightfully so. Because, I'm sure Beethoven's first day on the piano or harpsichord or whatever, he was awful, but with a prodigy, like within 3 months, he's light years ahead of where he should
But
be.
he was inspired and he found joy in that activity.
Yes. And then the same thing goes for, okay, if you go out and it's your first time to do whatever, fill in the blank, odds are you're going to be terrible. And the thing is, if you like it and you, like you said, you derive a joy out of, so like the other day was I didn't derive joy out of it at all, but it was my first like legitimate ever in a gym, like first workout with a trainer. And uh, I came out of there going like, oh my God, this is going to kill me. And not fun and all of that. But it's something where it's like, okay, well, let's see in 90 days where it's chartable. Like you can either lift a heavier thing or you can't. So
Hmm.
so it's like, let's see where that goes. But the improving of something that you're bad at over time facilitates the enjoyment, and then the evidence breeds confidence in that, like, okay, well, if you do it 10 times and three of them or six of them suck, well, then if you do it 10 more times, okay, now only four of them suck. Then you do it 10 more times and now only one of them suck. Then you do it 10 more times and they're all pretty good. Okay, well, then,
Now you level up to 15.
yes, exactly. And now you can look back and go, like, okay, at the beginning, you weren't necessarily an imposter. You just weren't very good. But the fact
Right.
that you've done it enough times to where now you could do another 10 more, like say it's taking photos or making a video or whatever. You could do 10 more and you could have a reasonable assumptive prediction that you're going to be pretty good, and most all of them will be average or above average versus when you started and you sucked. And then,
Right.
okay, well, if we do 10 more, so after a while, the math just compounds on itself. And now you have this sort of empirical evidence that shows, oh, I started here and now I'm here. And the idea there of compare yourself to yourself who you used to be
Hmm.
versus whatever else that it is that is triggering you to do the comparison test. Because for whatever reason, most of the time humans compare upward rather than downward. And so it's like I
Or
compare my,
inward.
what's that?
Or inward.
Yeah. Or like I'm matching my insides to your outsides,
Mm,
and I'm absolutely filling in the blanks of your story that I don't know,
mm.
and attributing like all of this magical thing. Like you might have put in 15-hour days for 10 years. I don't know that. I wasn't there. I don't see that. I see you at the finish line, and now I suck because I'm not where you are.
Well, that it's all that judgment, right? And I liked, like, you brought up agency.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that people really understand what that means. Like agency is that you're the captain of your own ship. Your ship is going forward and you
Yes.
get to choose which direction it's going in. And back to that freedom of accountability, right? And how you were talking about the guy, he has a labyrinth of maze of how he's blaming everybody else. So when you every time you give that to somebody else, you're giving a little bit of the power, the horsepower, the RPMs.
Yep.
any of that to somebody else and your belt slips. You can't like you just can't you can't your tire slips. You can't get going because you've given your power away and now you've lost agency. You've lost your position as the first captain, like the captain of the ship, the one that dictates where things goes. You no
Absolutely.
longer, and now you're like, I'm picturing this. I'm like, you got the pretty cabin at the top, and then like every time you give it to away, you blame somebody else. You take full responsibility, 100%
Mhm.
responsibility. You just might as well go to the cabin at the bottom, and
Right.
or and this is where you're just like, but we got, as long as we're on the ship, we can always get back. So
Yes.
how does somebody go from a habit of not taking responsibility for their own actions, like, or not even responsibility, but their responsibility for their own results, right? And blaming it, because you see this often. It's like, oh, especially in our industry, it's the market, it's the government, it's the environment, it's the economy, it's the family I grew up in, it's my parents, it's my mom, it's my dad, it's
Yep.
my, it's the way I look, it's the way it's everything else's fault. And like it doesn't even matter what it is. Like all these things, none of it matters.
Agreed. Well, and then
How do you reverse that thinking?
the logical flip side would be then like, okay, well then when you do well and you're successful, who's in control of that? Because it's weird where like, as humans, human nature is what it is, and we often want to default to I want all the credit and none of the blame, and that's kind of like a 9-year-old, where
Yeah.
we have this sort of arrested development there, and then the real thing would be, I would always say, like, even in the guys that are working for me or whatever, it's like start small, where it's like just start telling the truth. Like, if it's something as far as like, oh, I forgot that, or I effed that up or whatever, that's 100% on me. That's not because of traffic, or that wasn't because of my alarm didn't go off, or whatever. It could be something as minuscule as the alarm didn't go off because I didn't set it. Like you left that part out, or I was late because I misjudged the time it would take, or I was measuring it on my best commute ever, and that's not practical, and therefore traffic turned out to like really hamstring me, and that's on me because I wasn't thinking when I planned, or whatever. Something like that, where okay, admitting that it's not the end of the earth or not the end of the world, but it certainly is uncomfortable.
But it
You know,
got you your lesson so you don't repeat it.
right, right,
Now,
and
now you don't repeat it over and over and over again. Now you're
yeah,
like, okay, now I know where I failed. And now next time I can choose
yes,
differently. And then if I choose to not choose differently, then, once again, I get that choice that I have agency. I'm the captain of I made the choice to not set the alarm. I made the choice to not put up sticky notes. I made the choice to not utilize technology to the nth degree.
yes.
I chose not to figure it out.
Yeah, and like it can even be like as simple as I'm always, I prefer to I try to take shortcuts because I'm impatient and I don't want to put in the work because I'm afraid that it might not pay off. Like whatever that is, whatever the truth is in a given situation. Because
Now you know
as
what to work on.
yeah,
Now okay, now that is the thinking that I know I can work on because
yeah,
we became aware of it.
yeah, a lot of it, and so like,
I love that.
Wayne, our mutual friend and my co-host, and one of
And
your
my awareness partner who kicks
yes,
me in
and
the
your yes,
ass, who
yes,
I love and respect because we all need people in our lives who kick us in the ass when we're up
yes,
or
one hundred
down.
percent,